So during these weeks of Lent, we have been following a certain theme, getting to know the Jesus that we meet in the Gospels. And today, the Jesus we meet in this Gospel reading that we read from the Gospel of John is a Jesus who shows us a different way. Now, being here on this Sunday right before Palm Sunday, we sort of already know what that way is, don't we? And the hymns will give you a clue if you didn't. It's the way of the cross. We sing about it in our hymns. We start next week with Palm Sunday, and all week we'll go through things that bring us in that mind of the way of the cross. All of the events, the story that we know so well of his entrance into Jerusalem, his arrest, his trial, his death, his burial. But today, before we start all that, we find an interesting little intimate scene in the home of Martha and Mary and Lazarus, two sisters and a brother, some of Jesus' closest friends. I don't know about you, but before I get ready to do something I know is going to be hard, and of course most of us have not had to do something quite as hard as Jesus had to do, but I like to spend some time with friends, and that's what he was doing. He went to their home, and they had dinner for him. They were there for him. Everybody knew something was going to happen. There were wanted posters all over the place for Jesus of Nazareth. His disciples had already tried to discourage him from going to Jerusalem that year for the festival of Passover because they knew that it had heated up and that if he wouldn't back off of some of the things he had been saying and some of the things he was doing, it was very likely that this time they would get him. You know, they tried to get him many other times, tried to stone him, once tried to throw him off a cliff, and he always withdrew. But this time he had told them his mind was set. He wasn't going to withdraw. He was going to go through with the whole thing. And so here he is, before all that gets ready to happen, in the home of his dearest friends. And Mary takes a very costly ointment, one that would be used to anoint the body of someone dead in their faith. She has bought it because she knows, like they all know, that more than likely he won't come out of this week alive. And so she has this oil, and she anoints him right then and right there. And as always happens when we don't always agree on what God wants us to do, Judas is not happy about that. And I know in John it gives us that little parenthetical thing that he used to steal from the purse. That's not in some of the other accounts. And some people think that he may have been stealing from the purse, but probably to give to the zealots who wanted to make the kingdom come right now. We don't really know, but we know that he disagreed. And we know that Jesus called him up short for it. And Jesus said, leave her alone. You always have the poor there, and you need to pay attention to them each and every day. But you're not going to always have me. And she's doing something for me, and I'm going to receive it. And that's part of the different way that Jesus shows us in this story. The way of receiving. He is about to give everything that a human being can give, one's own life. But at this point, he's willing to receive. To receive something from a dear friend who wants to show him how much she and they love him. And he lets her do it. He shows us the way of receiving, which for many of us is a very, very difficult thing to do. We have a hard time receiving. Most of us have an easier time being on the giving end of things than on the receiving end of things. I remember way, way back, long before gray hair days, in college, I was on the leadership cabinet for the university, for Louisiana State University. And One of the jobs that we had was we trained all the leaders. If you were elected to a position or anything, this group of students, we had been trained, and we trained other leaders to lead. And part of our training was to go through something that at that time was a fairly new thing. There was an industrial psychologist that came in and led us through what was called sensitivity training. And one of the hardest things about sensitivity training that we all experienced as leaders was when we had to take the hot seat, which was a chair in the middle with a circle of chairs on the outside in which all 20 or so of our peers sat, and our advisor. We were not allowed to say anything if we were on the hot seat, and what they had to say to us was supposed to be good things about us. The things that they saw in us that were wonderful, the things that they could affirm, good things, compliments, affirmations. You would think in one way that ought to be a good thing, but when you were in the hot seat with all 20 people telling you how wonderful you are and all this stuff, it's one of the hardest things I ever had to do, and not talk. I wanted to say things like, oh, that's nothing. No, that's not anything. Oh, anybody can do that. All the kinds of things that you probably want to say too when somebody's trying to give us something and we have a hard time receiving it. And yet Jesus shows us that one of the important ways of living life is not only to be able to give, but also to be able to receive. Because when we are not willing to receive, we do not allow someone else to give what maybe they needed to give. If Jesus had not received what Mary wanted to give him, she would have been just stuck with that costly oil, feeling very embarrassed, and never having the opportunity to physically show how much she cared. It's hard to receive. And there are really a couple of things that we have to be willing to do if we're going to follow that way that Jesus showed. One is that we have to get rid of some of the obstacles of attitude that we have. What do I mean by that? Well, what are the attitudes that make us not want to receive anything from somebody? I take care of myself. I do everything. I don't need anything. I'm here to serve you. That's my middle name, service. I'm here to serve you. I don't need anything. I don't want to owe anybody anything. I don't want to feel indebted to somebody. I don't want to feel like I can't do it all myself. Anything ring bells in heads at all? With anybody? We have trouble sometimes receiving because there's an emptiness in receiving. You receive something because you know you need it. And so many of us don't want to be that vulnerable. We don't want to be vulnerable enough to actually need something from somebody. We want to be sure that we can get it from ourselves. Maybe from God, but God needs to not work through them. God needs to just do a direct hit to me. But God's the only one I'll really trust to give me something that I'll receive from. And yet so much of the time God works through the Marys, through the people who want to give to us too. So we have to, first of all, be willing to remove those obstacles, the obstacles of attitude that make us just go giving crazy to the point where we ignore the fact that we have needs as well. And that brings us to the second thing that has to happen for us to follow the way of Jesus, the way that Jesus shows us about receiving as well as giving. And that is, there are behaviors that have to be changed. And the biggest behavior that we have to change is being able to know that we need things. Secondly, to know what they are. And thirdly, to be willing to tell people, to be willing to ask for what we need. It's so hard sometimes when the giving comes naturally to us to not even know what we need, much less to ask for. But we weren't built to never need anything. God didn't make us that way. And we weren't built to never receive anything. God didn't make us that way. God made us for a balance of giving and receiving. And we only give well when we understand how to receive well. But not everybody knows exactly what we need. We have to be able to tell them. Sometimes one of the biggest things that comes up in marriage counseling is helping a partner know that they've got to tell the other person, they've got to tell their spouse what they need. That the spouse can't always guess what they need. And that sometimes when we think we know what somebody needs, we keep giving them what we need, and they keep wondering why they're not getting what they need, and we think we're giving so great. Man, we're such givers. We give all the time, and yet we're giving them all the things we would want to have, and they're going, I don't want that. And then we're getting madder and madder. I always give to him or her, and then they never know what I need, but we never say it. You have to actually tell people what you need. Even priests. You have to even tell priests what you need. And prayer is a large part of telling God what we and others need. In that case, not because God doesn't know, but because we have to know what we need in order to be able to receive what God gives us. It's the way we were made. Our giving is better when we're able to receive. And so there are things that we do that we need not to do in giving and receiving. And there are things we don't do that we do need to do in giving and receiving. Do those words sound familiar? From the confession that we will make? That there are things done, that there are things left undone, and that goes for giving and receiving as well. Because the way that Jesus shows us, this way of the cross, is a way that we all walk to some extent in our lives, and if we haven't, we will. We all have a way of a cross to walk. And we were never intended to walk that way alone. Never. So the way that Jesus shows is to continue giving as you walk that way. And to know what you need, to ask for it, and to be willing to receive it from whatever way and from whomever it comes. May it be so. Amen.